So this is basically what they call the Bible of psychology. And it's recently come out, which a lot of us already knew, but Scientific American just came out with an article that states that the DSM has no scientific basis. Again, we made this shit up. Welcome to Therapist's Coven, where we talk all things witchy therapy. This podcast explores what it means to decolonize healing, honor the wisdom of our ancestors, and bridge evidence-based therapy with the medicines, rituals, and practices that have supported human well-being for generations. I am the host, Rise, like Still I Rise, or rather the channel, the steward of Therapist Coven. Whether you're a therapist, healer, coach, or a curious soul answering the call of a spiritual path, welcome. The portal is open. Hello, everyone. So this is part 1 of a series called Spiritual Roots to Mental Illness and Diagnosis. And I want to break it up into different parts because there's a lot here. I'm going to be talking about depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, psychosis, addiction, eating disorders. And so I want to break each topic up into a different episode to make it digestible and to, give myself some space too and make it spacious. But before I dive into that, I really want to start with a disclaimer because this is part of what my intention for dismantling the harm that is caused in the mental health systems nowadays, which is this idea that a therapist is an expert, a psychologist is the expert, the authority. And so I just want to put it off the bat that I am not claiming to be the authority on this. There's a lot of nuance to well-being and to dis-ease and to specific mental health diagnoses. And so I want to make sure that I deliver this with care, careful as in full of care, and trust you as the listener to discern for yourself. This is one of the reasons why I connect so much to Buddhism, because the Buddha laid out his teachings and said, don't take my word for it. Connect with it yourself and feel it out for yourself. So that's the disclaimer I'm giving here, because at the end of the day, we make all this shit up. Right? Like all these words that we use and all these patterns and boxes that we create, we really make it up. And so this is really a surrender to the great mystery of life. And here are some ideas that I've come up with from all of my causes and conditions in my life, all of my karma and everything I've learned and I've been through. And I'm presenting this to you very humbly and see what resonates and leave the rest. So take this all lightly. So first of all, as I mentioned in my first podcast, mental health, right? I disagree with calling it mental health because it is much bigger than just the mind. I think Western culture is very heady. And so, of course, we're going to call it just mental health. There's something wrong with your mind, that's it. But as we know, because we feel it, when we have a mental illness, quote unquote, we feel that full body. It's not just our brain that gets sick, quote unquote, but this is also a very physical experience. We know this if you've ever been depressed. Depression is very heavy, right? Somatically, you're in a freeze response. Your body feels frozen sometimes. And we know this with anxiety. Anxiety is very physical. You feel the body jittery, the adrenaline, the heart beating really fast, right? When you feel like you're going to die, when you're having a panic attack. And also spiritual. Like, how can we ignore the spiritual components of these these diseases, right? Like depression is such a spiritual illness when we feel a loss of wanting to live sometimes. Like, isn't that's as spiritual as it gets, right? Our core instinct to stay alive, to survive, is sick, is ill, is unwell. So that to me is extremely spiritual. Anxiety, right? This fear, this constant fear, this inability to feel safe in the world. That's very spiritual. To not feel grounded, to not feel rooted. So we'll get into this more, as I said, in the different episodes. But I just wanted to put into context that when I'm talking about mental illness is also illness of the body, illness of the spirit, illness of the heart. It's a holistic illness when we start to experience some of these mental illnesses that are laid out in the DSM. And, to talk about the DSM, so the DSM is a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is published by the American Psychiatric Association. So this is basically what they call the Bible of psychology. And it's recently come out, which a lot of us already knew, but Scientific American just came out with an article that states that the DSM has no scientific basis. Again, we made this shit up. And as I mentioned in the first episode, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there is wisdom in finding a particular pattern within humans and saying and labeling it and being like, this sounds like this, and a group of humans fit into this category. There's wisdom in that. And I know myself, when I got diagnosed at like 16 with major depression and anxiety, it was such a relief to be like, oh, there's a name for what I'm experiencing. Oh, other people experience this too. I am not alone. So there's wisdom in diagnoses, and there's no scientific basis to it. So this DSM that claims to be the authority is not necessarily the authority, right? So dismantling this idea that this is the book that is going to tell you about yourself and it's going to fix it, because a lot of people don't fall into these categories. Human suffering is complex and is caused by many, many things, especially when we play into social and political reasons, poverty, trauma, ongoing trauma, intergenerational trauma, oppression, racism, ableism. Of course, we're going to be unwell if you experience oppression constantly. Of course, it makes sense to feel unwell, to have a quote unquote mental illness, to be depressed, to have complex trauma when there's this ongoing oppression and this ongoing societal marginalization. So that's something that the DSM doesn't really put into context. It makes it an individual problem when we know that it's a collective problem. And human suffering in general, right? The Buddha said, first noble truth is life is suffering. And that is the truth of existence. We cannot necessarily escape that. I mean, the Buddha did lay out some ways that we could, but it is a main part of being alive, of existing. So this DSM trying to put it into category and then being like, these are the solutions is way too black and white. Like I said, there's many different nuances to everyone's individual expressions. And I think understanding your specific nuance and the middle path of how may these different diagnoses that are laid out in the DSM, how do they express themselves in me? I think bringing them those together is important to your healing journey. And so this is what I'm about, integrating all these things, Western and all the other medicines, Buddhism, indigenous, spiritual. So, right, I'm coming the spiritual part. I feel really strongly about this. So I actually had a dream where I was being downloaded into and channeling the spiritual roots of specific mental illnesses. And again, mental illness is not the same as physical biological illness. I think that's something that the DSM is trying to do, which I get it. There's a certain security when we can make something tangible and make something material. So, for example, with depression, this idea that depression is a deficiency in the brain. It's just a deficiency in serotonin, and so let's give you some medicine and you're going to be okay. There's a lot of security in that and being like, this is what it is, and that's that. But as we know, it's more complex than that. And pharmaceutical companies are making bank off of this idea that here's a medicine, it cures you, and that's that. Not to throw away the baby with the bathwater. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that. Medication can be super helpful. I am not against medication. When I took medication for the first time, I was 19 years old and I was severely depressed. I had been depressed since I was 11 years old. So taking medication, antidepressants, was like a veil was lifted and I was able to experience life differently than I ever had. So it opened up a world of possibilities. And I was on it for about a couple years, but I had a whole bunch of side effects. I lost my sex drive. And as a young woman, that was terrible. As a young woman in a relationship, that was terrible. I lost my sex drive. I lost my, like, yeah, there was like a zest and creativity that I lost when I was on antidepressants. So I got off of them and have since learned how to deal with the way that depression and anxiety and complex trauma express themselves through me in different ways, which I'll talk more about. But medication can be helpful as a stepping stone to something else. And maybe for you, medication is something you need to be on for life, right? Discern for yourself with the knowing that it's not all mental. It's not all mental. That perhaps if other aspects are addressed, like the spiritual, the physical, the emotional, then these mental illnesses might recover. You might be able to recover your wellness. And another thing that I have an issue with is the way that insurance companies exploit the DSM and mental illness. So one of the reasons I don't take insurance as a therapist is because you have to diagnose someone in order to for them to be eligible for insurance. And I don't agree with this. I don't believe that everyone fits into boxes. Some people come with a lot of, again, different nuances. Intergenerational trauma, for one. How do you diagnose that when it manifests as depression, when it manifests as constant anxiety, when it manifests as an eating disorder? And it's like all these different ways that the root of ancestral trauma expresses themselves to someone that doesn't fit into the DSM. And so I have a hard time diagnosing people for that reason. And again, insurance companies need you to be there's a very specific formula in the way that you communicate to them someone's illness and disease. And I don't believe in coming from a disease mindset, a disease focus. I don't believe in coming in to a therapeutic healing relationship from the pathology. I am a strength-based therapist, which is what they call strength-based therapist, which is that I look for the wisdom. And this is where my Buddhist psychology training comes in as well, what they call brilliant sanity or basic goodness, which is where's the wisdom in everything, even in the illness, even in the dis-ease? What is actually trying to come through here? What is trying to be seen? What is trying to be reborn? And where can we highlight and amplify the wisdom so that we can unshame it? Because a lot of times when we come at something from the pathology, from that there's something wrong with you, there's a lot of shame that comes with that. And so coming at it from the wisdom unshames it and gives it a little more space and room to work with. I don't know about you, but I've never been able to heal anything through shame. Shame is not the best healer. Only love, compassion, radical acceptance, loving, relating with different parts of us has created healing for me. Shame has never done that. And so that's another reason why I don't like the DSM. And again, it is helpful to have certain patterns in humans that are categorized, and sometimes it is helpful to have a diagnosis. It's a stepping stone, and sometimes we need to know when to throw it away and when to be like, this is actually means something else for me, or I'm depressed because of my ancestral trauma. Like sometimes we need to know how to throw it away. Or I'm depressed because life is hard. Am I right? Life is so fucking hard. And so knowing when to lean into when a diagnosis can be helpful and when to throw it out. And then the spiritual roots to diseases. This is something that's not really talked about very much. And I have clients who come to me for this specifically as a spiritual human and a spiritual therapist, where they've been to other therapists and they haven't been able to get a spiritual connection or a spiritual guidance to why they feel unwell. And so this is what I want to talk about. Every illness has a spiritual root. There's something that is spiritually misaligned that can also be looked at and made space for. And so when we're talking about spirituality, let's define spirituality. This is a big one. Spirituality. What is spirituality? And it's almost like words don't do it justice. It's almost like our human consciousness is too limited to put to words what spirituality is. To me, spirituality is something bigger than ourselves, a connection larger than ourselves, beyond the physical, beyond what we can see, beyond what we can understand fully, because our brains aren't adept enough, intelligent enough to comprehend. When I look at the universe and I see the vastness of the universe, I am in awe. How can we possibly understand the vastness, billions of galaxies and stars? How can we possibly understand the vastness of existence, the great mystery of life? And that's what spirituality is to me. This understanding that it's bigger than us, it's greater than us. This interconnection with everything, with life. When I am fully connected spiritually, there's a depth to this realm of surrender. This realm of surrender, of the unfolding of life, the nature of things, the trust in life. There's a presence, there's a magic in the presence. Bhikkhu, a Buddhist monk, calls it the subtle joy of the present moment. That's where spirituality lives for me. In the moment where you can't necessarily put words to it, it's so ephemeral, but you can feel there's something that just pauses and quiets and comes alive and dies. There's peace, there's love, And so, spirituality, how does one hold it? And this is where, as humans, we love to make meaning. We love to have boxes. We love it, right? It helps us feel some sense of security, which can be helpful. So, this is where religions come in, where we try to make sense of it. So, we create these formulas and these stories and these scriptures and mythologies. And we also attribute it to deities, to God, spirit, ancestors. Animism is a way, right, to nature, to the trees being alive, the water being alive. So we hold it through channeling it into something. And really, at the end of it all, it's a place to return to over and over again that feels like I can be okay right now. So I personally have many, many words for God. I have a connection with God. And to me, God is, I like, recently I heard Gus, grace, universe, spirit. To me, God is ancestral medicine that comes through me. To me, God is the vastness of the universe. To me, God is the divine mother, the holy father. To me, God is that voice that always pulls me through. That little voice of wisdom when I'm struggling that I hear, that holds me, that loves me. To me, God is unconditional love, no matter what, unconditional love. And everyone has their own experience. In the 12-step community, we call it your higher power. Your higher power can and will if sought. And so everyone has their own experience with this connection with a higher power, with something greater than ourselves, and their own way in which they relate. And I also think that like there's such a, again, like the somatic experience of a connection to a higher power, a connection to spirituality is really profound. I think this is why we worship in churches. When you walk in a church and when you have a room full of people worshiping, when you're singing that songs in church. I grew up Catholic, so that's where my experience comes from. That experience in the body, that sense of belonging, that sense of being loved is so profound. And we also see this in concerts, in festivals. There's a room full of people being together, engaging together, expressing together. It's really profound. And when we see it in a sunset, when we're looking out into a landscape, when we've climbed the mountain and we can see the horizon, when we're looking out at the ocean, the expansion, the ease that we feel in our bodies, that to me is God. That to me is spirituality. And so again, words are words. So I'm not going to do it justice. But notice for yourself what it feels like. What does spirituality mean to you? What is your connection to a higher power? And how do you access that? And so, another note on mental illness as wisdom. So, one of the things I learned in my Buddhist psychology program is that everything has wisdom and neuroses. So, you can flip it back and forth wisdom, neuroses. When we're in the neuroses, it's the illness of it, is the manifestation of it that hurts, that causes harm, that's sluggish, that's gunky, right? That causes suffering. And we're in the wisdom of it, we're in the manifestation of it where it becomes an opportunity. So that is a possibility when we look at mental illness or diseases from the wisdom. Where is the opportunity here for something to be transformed, for something to be healed, for something to be recovered, for something to be reborn, for something that hasn't been looked at maybe ever in my ancestry to be looked at now. Where is the opportunity here? What is this sickness showing me? What can I learn from this? What's deeper here? Deeper than the surface. This sucks. This hurts. I want this to be gone. When we learn to stay with it, what can we learn from this? And with that, it's not to bypass. You can't talk about spirituality without talking about spiritual bypassing. I think a lot of our new age paradigm right now, there's a lot of spiritual bypassing. And so spiritual bypassing is when you take spirituality as another form to bypass, to ignore, to suppress your suffering or the reality of life, the truth of oppression, right? For example, we take spirituality to say, like, one of them is we're all one. Why are you focused on race if we're all one? And at one level, that's true. In absolute reality, we all are one. We all are one. We're all interconnected. And in relative reality, there's a lot of separation that causes harm. There's a lot of the ways that we put each other in boxes causes a lot of harm. And that is true and real. And us trying to ignore that and bypass that by saying we're all one doesn't help anyone, doesn't do anything. So it's important to understand both. Understand absolute reality and relative reality, which is a Buddhist term, by the way, absolute and relative reality. And to not spiritually bypass, to have the understanding of knowing the truth of something in this reality. When I'm feet on the ground, this hurts. And then from that place, without trying to get rid of it necessarily, and that's a gift. We'll talk about that. That's a practice, right? Whenever we enter something, we enter a wound and we're trying to get rid of it as soon as possible, the wound's just going to tighten up even more. So to enter the wound first from acceptance, radical acceptance. And then from there to listen to it, understand what it's trying to tell you, what you can learn from it. Then from there we can move some things. So not bypassing, not going to what can I learn from this right now, right now, right now. No, first it takes a complete surrender and acceptance of the wound, of the pain. And that's excruciating sometimes. It's not easy. It's not easy. And this is why I think a therapeutic relationship can be really helpful. Community can be really helpful. Some of these things we should not do alone. So to wrap up here, let's hold this all lightly. Will you? Will you hold it all lightly with me? Diagnosis, spirituality, all of it. As we get deeper into this series, the next up, I'm going to be talking about depression. Let's see. Let's see where this takes us together. Let's see what we find out together. Inviting a moment to pause here and just notice what's present for you. You might want to take a few deep breaths as you feel into what is your body sensing? What are you feeling? And is there anything you want to take away with you? Any lines, any perspectives, anything you want to integrate throughout your day, throughout your life? It's always good to pause between this thing and the next thing. So just taking a moment for this sacred pause.